Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for engaging with and thinking out loud with your peers. It's so great to hear what other folks are doing around the province and beyond in terms of this work. I'm going to pass the torch back to Miriam to engage us in one more chunk of thinking before we do some closing.
Yeah, thank you. Folks, if you are comfortable, I invite you just to take a moment and add a theme to the chat that surfaced in your group, maybe something you're wondering about, something that you connected with, something that resonated, but just so we get a sense across the groups what folks were talking about or what was kind of landing for you all. So we're going to dive into a couple of other aspects of SEL and what that might mean or look like at secondary. And I just want to make an admission before we dive in that I had prepared like a fire hose of strategies of different things that you could take up and do and skills to build like emotion recognition and regulation and all of these things. And I felt this enormous pressure of trying to build a case for SEL at secondary, that this was like a one shot and, I've got 20 minutes to convince you all and then you can go and do something. And what I prepared was good and it was solid. And I'm happy to share that with you if you are interested in some of those strategies. But what I noticed is that it was actually incongruent with what I know and believe to be true about SEL. That if we are actually talking about SEL as a relational practice, then we can't just think about like this fire hose of strategies of trauma-informed practice for everyone, and we don't think deeply about why we're doing it. And so I kind of set aside some of the things that I thought you might want to hear, and I'm going to actually speak from my heart about what I think is really important and some of the starting places for SEL. So I feel like it's a bit risky for me because it feels that I will be less likable by all of you, that maybe you want just only practical things. But my hope is actually that we kind of nudge our thinking and can continue to make meaning of what SEL means in secondary. So I think at the heart of this work, again, is relationships, but this starts with ourselves. And so when we think about SEL, we can think about identity first, right? And that this is true of for our students, but also for ourselves. And so from an Indigenous scholar's perspective, this idea of emotional health and well-being begins by knowing who you are, being confident, feeling proud and accepting of who you are, having self-respect and loving yourself. We're going to circle back to loving yourself in a moment, but having a sense of true authenticity. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I teach, what I end up doing becomes quite performative. That I separate, who I truly am from how I show up in my classroom. And I think if I were to ask myself, when I leave my classroom, who am I really like when I'm around the people that know me and love me? Am I loud? Am I silly? Am I quirky? And how does that actually show up in my classroom? Because we know, Parker Palmer has said it, we quote it all the time, we teach who we are. So there are elements of ourselves that need to be present in our classroom so that we are authentic with our students. But the challenge, I think, and in Chris Emden's words, is that unfortunately, more often than not, we train students who don't yet know themselves to follow teachers who have not learned to know themselves either. To know ourselves is to engage in committed, conscientious self-reflection with the goal of stripping away what you are doing for validation, that sort of performance, you're trying to show something, prove something, from moving away from validation from institutions and systems to recognizing who you are as you are in the context where you are, not a title, not a role or a job, but as a person who is loved and who deserves love. I haven't really thought about my role as an educator in this way before. That I haven't really thought about showing up as a person who is loved and who deserves love. I hope that for my students, they feel that. But I don't often show up in teaching spaces, kind of leaning into this space. And so I'm putting this forward to us to think about how do we show up as authentic beings with our students? Because if we're looking for our students to center humanity, to step into their full selves, we also need to be teaching from that same place. When we start with ourselves, we attend to both our hopes of SEL for our students, but also for ourselves. And what I mean by that is something I learned this summer. My family went on a canoe trip I don't know about you, but taking a 6-year-old to portage, it's not always a great idea. Actually, it wasn't too bad. He mostly just sat in the canoe and we did all the work. But what we learned is if you only paddle on one side of the canoe, you very rapidly go in circles. And so my work with SEL has been that we look so much at students, at their social and emotional competence, at their well-being, at their identity and who they are, but we neglect ourselves. And so if we actually want to get somewhere, we need to paddle on both sides of the canoe, focusing both on students and also on ourselves, because we know that unless our skill set is rich in this area, we're not able to effectively model this work for our students. So this work, we need to begin with ourselves, honoring who we are, showing up authentically in our classrooms, because this is part of how we'll build relationships, but then also attending to our own social and emotional strengths and maybe starting to build some of our stretches out so that we can be effective at modeling. Another stance that we need to take, or that I think we need to take, is this idea that children and youth are gifts. Now, this is a picture of my son, and sometimes I forget that he is a gift. There are many, many moments where I forget this. And I know, in the push of the time and everything we battle, all these tensions we battle in our learning spaces, it's really easy to forget that children are gifts. And so if we think about SEL in our approach, we really need to consider the ways in which our children and youth are gifts, and that we need to believe that they are strong and capable in their uniqueness, full of potential, living and growing in complex interdependence with humans and all world relations. But not only that children and youth are gifts, but they also bring gifts. And our job as educators is to help them excavate and discover the gifts that they bring. That's at the heart of SEL, this understanding of who we are and celebrating these diverse and wonderful gifts. So that's our stance that we want to take as we approach SEL, and really think about how we might build relationships from this place. So cultivating co-created caring communities, showing up in our full authentic selves as educators, knowing deeply that children and youth are gifts. And then from this place, we can build trusting relationships. And oh my goodness, you do not need me to say the things that we've heard before. Everyone talks about relationships, right? Every researcher and practitioner and teacher talks about relationships. And we know that relationships create this bridge that will build that community, right? That they're essential for teaching and learning, because teaching and learning is relational. But here's kind of the nudge, the rub, I think. We say it all, that relationships are important. But what happens when you're working with students who do not receive the way you show up and the way you offer care as care? And that is a part of a bigger conversation. In fact, Leighton and I have had recently, but it echoes, this idea around connection and attachment. So we know that our early life experiences set up a framework for attachment, for the way in which we view the world, the way in which we connect with others. And for the most part, from all of our kind of Eurocentric Western studies, we see that most folks have a secure attachment, that they had a pretty warm, caring, consistent caregiver in their early years. But we also know that there are individuals who have an avoidant attachment, where the caregiver was inconsistent in their ability to offer care. Maybe care was disrupted because of trauma. Maybe care was disrupted because of, context or a point in time in history that disrupted that attachment. And so we know that there are students, individuals, people, humans who will have avoidant attachments, where they become very independent. They dissociate from others. In the same way, we know that there are folks who have anxious or ambivalent attachments, right? Where they exhibit their attachment framework as being high needs, really desperate for attention. And maybe you have some of these students that you've interacted with in class that, always need your attention, always need your help, always need your support. And there's a chance, not necessarily, but there is a chance that there could be some form of anxious attachment there, seeking validation. And then the last attachment framework is this disorganized attachment. And often we see a disorganized attachment framework present in the lives of people who've experienced significant trauma. And so we work with individuals who have all kinds of attachment frameworks, and that looks different in our classroom. And by way of note, I always feel cautious when we use giant theories to quickly distill and label individuals. That is not the goal. I don't want to think about this as a reductionist, like this kid must have secure attachment, this kid must da-da-da. That's not the point. The point here is simply to notice the ways that people interpret relationships or expect relationships for their survival. And so we see tendencies and ways that folks interact based on their attachment and based on many other things as well. So given this, given that we know relationships are important, given that we know there are some folks who have a secure attachment, and those folks who have a secure attachment are actually often the easiest folks to have a relationship with. So this is my push for you. What are the ways as educators that we might implicitly reinforce attachment styles in our classroom? So if we go back to this, if there's someone who has an avoidant attachment style, which is basically like, stay out of my face, get out of my way, I don't have time for you. How do we implicitly reinforce that to that individual, that that's the way relationships operate in the world? If they want us to be there, do we just kind of move away and let them fly under the radar and then continue to reinforce that relationships are inconsistent and people don't actually show up to support? If there are folks who are who might have this disorganized attachment and they're aggressive, they're volatile, do we just avoid them as well? Or we respond with maybe punitive action? And so as I think about this in my own practice, I think about those students who are like magnetic, they draw you in, they're warm, they're affable, they're really easy to like. And by focusing or very easily building relationships with some students, I'm overlooking relationships with others. And so the question I think here is, how do we disconfirm insecure internal working models of attachment? How do we show up for kids in a way that shows there is such a thing as secure, warm, nurturing, consistent relationships, even in the face of you saying like a big get out of here? I was actually going to swear, and then I thought I better not, it's recorded. But you're all secondary educators, so you know what get out of here means. But how do we actually disconfirm these internal working models? And then what's really tricky here, and this is kind of the push, is that sometimes we think it's about ourselves, right? We think like, I am warm and I am caring and I smile and I know everyone's names and all the things we say that are important, that are SEL and in all contexts. But unless your care is received as care by the recipient, it is not care at all. And that's according to Nell Noddings. And so we need to differentiate our care based on who we have in our classrooms and who's in front of us. We'll have to talk about that another time, but not today. So we're going to wrap up. The last thing I'm going to share is just the shift in growing mindset. And that growing mindset, I just have so many things to talk about. So growth mindset is important. You all can take a look at that. I'm going to be provocative and talk about self-actualization and radical love as a mindset before I head off. This is my last crack at this. And so when we think about relationships and caring, countering those internal working models of attachment require us to have high expectation and hopes for our students. So it's not just about love and nurturing, but the way we show up to love is actually about having these expectations, knowing who they are, recognizing their identity. And I think maybe next time you meet, you'll talk more about identity and equity. And so again, one of my favorite authors right now is Chris Emdin. The book is Ratchetdemic. I definitely recommend you take a look at that. And so he shares this idea of a mindset of self-actualization and self-love starts, as I said, with ourselves. So as educators, we need to unapologetically love ourselves and love and accept our young people, however they show up in school, and to get our young people to fully love themselves. It is our job as as educators to hold young people to the highest academic expectations, while also holding society to the highest expectations in accepting the genius of young people in whatever form it comes. The last thing I'll say related to this, earlier this week, we had a call from rural educators across BC, and an educator from Haida Gwaii shared how they're doing a program, and not a program, but they have this project related to food. They're growing food. They're using the food in the kitchen. They've created a greenhouse. It's just the most phenomenal thing you can ever think of. They're hunting for food. This is what's feeding their kids. And he shared that typically or traditionally reluctant learners in the classroom thrive. Many of them thrive as food gatherers, as hunters, as knowledgeable students in the area of food and sustainability. And here is an example of an educator who's recognizing the brilliance of his students and calling society out to say, this is where there's genius in our kids. I am recognizing their genius and creating opportunities for them to thrive in my context. I have to stop. I have so many things I want to share, but I'm going to stop here. Leighton, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Miriam. So, folks, as you can tell, we are just so excited to be connecting with you across BC to be having this conversation around all of our learners. Miriam, I just want to highlight a couple things that you shared and how powerful they are. And I just want to make those explicit links to Indigenous perspectives and ways of knowing. One perspective from nations in now what are called British Columbia is that we don't have deficit language in those Indigenous languages. We speak as of all students having gifts and all people in the community, in the circle, offering gifts. And so we as secondary educators, we had this really incredible opportunity, me being a science teacher, Rudy being an English teacher, Mia being an everything teacher, to think about where are those opportunities in our classes to communicate to our kids that we see them all as gifted, that we see them all as having gifts, and that whatever we're doing, whatever we're teaching, it's an opportunity to develop their gifts, that you are all mathematicians in this math class, people. And I can't wait to see where you go from wherever you are, because you're building on being competent. And that's really hard for secondary kids, especially older kids who didn't have success in younger grades, to think, I can't do this. And so part of my role from an SEL perspective, from a justice-oriented, a transformative SEL perspective, is to say, oh no, you have it in you, and I'm going to help you grow that. Because I'm really focusing on an internal locus of control, or what we'll talk about next time is this identity perspective, which is teaching adolescents is identity work. It's building their understanding of themselves as competent and helping them create tools to be able to be successful in school, in life, maybe in dating. Let's face it, people, they've already started. There was a comment in there somewhere. Woo! Miriam, thank you for this incredible time with us. Folks, thank you for thinking about SEL as something that's all of our work at the classroom level. We've done SEL work at the grade level where, the grade 9s are struggling. Let's do some SEL work across the grade where we talk about who we could be and what we want to do and what actions we're going to take, but also at the school level, right? Thinking about how can we as a school think about who do we want to be, and seeing all of our kids as the leadership kids, not just one class who got into that block, who maybe don't even need to be in that block, people. I'm just saying. Okay, friends. Can we give Miriam a little thanks, everyone? Could be in the chat box. This is applause and sign language, everybody. You bet. Yeah. Just raising your hands from Coast Salish perspective. Miriam, thank you for joining us, being part of this work. I'm so fortunate to work with you. In our next session, everyone, we'll be joined by Beth Applewhite, who is a district principal for equity in Burnaby, and also by Leona Prince, who is a district principal in the Geographic Center of British Columbia, SD91. You might know it by Burns Lake, Vanderhoof, and Fort St. James. In that time, similarly, we'll look at some big ideas, but we'll really think about decolonizing our classrooms and our schools in secondary, because peeps, we can do it. And let's face it, we're already doing it. We're just not always conscious of the moves that we make that are moving in that direction. And sometimes the things that we reinforce or that we practice that maybe we need to unpack and shift, which will bridge just really so nicely, Miriam, to the work that you introduced us to today. This recording will come out in about a week, everybody. And so we really hope that you'll be interested in sharing it with colleagues, maybe using snippets at staff meetings or department meetings. And I just want to close by saying that UBC is so happy to host this. And the Edith Lando Virtual Center is helping us tape it, record it, edit it. And the primary goal of the center is to meet learners where they are, online and just in time, with innovative learning tools, resources, and strategies. And so we're so appreciative to be partnering in this way, where we can connect, we can document it, and then for us to be able to send you the links after, where you can use little segments from Miriam's time today and from next times, so that it doesn't feel like you came to a thing that you're supposed to do, but it's a thing that you can return to with colleagues to think about what kind of difference can we make in our contexts. Speaking of love, from a pedagogy of love, which is an equity-oriented stance, love you in a professional way, everybody. I know it's a long haul right now, but we can do this because we have each other and because it's so important. What important work we do. Okay, take good care. See you for the next session. We'll send you a reminder, don't worry, because I know. What day is it even right now? Okay, take care, friends.